Ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is about to start. Can I ask you all to take a seat before we start it formally? Please take a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, please take a seat so we can start the meeting. Please take a seat. Excellencies, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's a great honor to welcome you all to the opening of the 22nd Human Dimension Implementation Meeting. I would especially like to warmly welcome His Excellency Foreign Minister Jacek Czaputowicz of Poland, our host country, our keynote speaker, Mr. Michael O'Flaherty, the Director of the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, and other panelists at this opening session. I would also like to extend warm welcome to all delegations of participating states, as well as participants from international organizations and civil society. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the OSCE as a regional security organization is based on the concept of comprehensive security, meaning that all three dimensions should be considered equally important for peace and security. This provides a unique context to the human dimension, as it is fully recognized that the implementation of the human dimension commitments by participating states, or lack thereof, has implications for peace and security in our region. The Human Dimension Implementation Meeting provides a forum for discussing the implementation of full range of human dimension commitments by OSCE participating states. This reflects the principle that compliance with the commitments is a subject of direct and legitimate concern for all participating states. The openness of the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting to the active participation of civil society gives them an opportunity to address concerns about the implementation of OSCE human dimension commitments and make recommendations on how to address them. Ladies and gentlemen, there are worrisome trends in the OSCE region with regard to all the three topics that were specifically elected for this meeting. Regarding the freedom of media, I just want to mention how its credibility is being undermined, including by the propagation of fake news, which in turn can undermine the development of an informed public opinion, crucial for the proper functioning of democracy. The second selected topic is the rights of migrants. The divisive discourse around this topic is well known, but we will be discussing it on the basis of the commitments of participating states who have recognized the substantial economic and social contribution that migrants and refugees can make for inclusive growth and sustainable development. Discussion will inter alia address integration of migrants, support to those states most affected, and how to improve reception conditions. This brings me to the third selected topic, which is relevant to the other two: combating racism, xenophobia, intolerance, and discrimination. There is a need for participating states to renew their efforts to counter rising trends of intolerance and discrimination. In particular, to counter polarization, which in light of history carries with it tremendous risk to peace and security to the detriment of all. Once we go down the slippery slope of allowing the intolerance and discrimination to thrive, no group, and I repeat, no group, can assume that they are immune once the principle has been eroded. The principle of tolerance and non-discrimination must be protected and promoted in line with OSCE commitments. Here it is worth recalling that our human dimension commitments do not only relate to the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, but also to actively promote them. That is how, in 2008, participating states recognized in Helsinki the importance of a broad partnership in the promotion of human rights, including not only state institutions, but also pluralistic civil society. Before leaving the topic of intolerance and discrimination, I would like to express my concern on the situation of Roma and Sinti, where there is little evidence of actual improvements, while we have been witnessing a new surge in violence against them in some participating states. This needs to be taken seriously by the states concerned, and ODIHR remains willing to assist. But there are also positive trends. We shouldn't forget that. Here I would like to highlight the global power of the Me Too movement and the impact it is having in changing the discourse and ending impunity for sexual harassment and sexual violence against women in many OSCE participating states. The sheer number of high-profile survivors coming forward ensured media attention to this enormous and widespread problem, leading other stakeholders to find themselves forced to take these matters seriously, and then having a domino effect across professions and classes. We have to continue to seize this moment to eliminate sexual and gender-based violence in the OSCE region in accordance with OSCE commitments. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of the current climate, it is important to recall that the OSCE Human Dimension commitments were developed jointly and adopted freely and anonymously by all participating states. They establish, in the words of the Astana document, and I quote, clear standards for the participating states in their treatment of each other and of all individuals within their territories. In essence, OSCE participating states have agreed through their human dimension commitments that pluralistic democracy based on the rule of law is the only system of government suitable to guarantee human rights effectively. Participating states are accountable to their citizens and responsible to each other for the full implementation of their commitments. Thus, I encourage all participants of this meeting to engage in discussions, voice your concerns, and learn from others, not only during working sessions, but also in the various side events that have been organized. I just want to remind all of you about the speakers list, that those who want to speak, that they put themselves on the speakers list. and also to remind everybody that only the participating states have the right to speak in this opening session. But without further ado, I declare open the 22nd Human Dimension Implementation Meeting. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Foreign Minister Jacek Czaputowicz of Poland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Director, Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished guests. I am honored to welcome you to the annual Human Dimension Implementation Meeting in Warsaw. I regret that despite the efforts of the Italian chair, it was not possible to reach a consensus regarding the agenda of this year's meeting. I hope that it will not affect the status and role of this year's meeting. I hope, because I think that it is the largest and most recognized platform for dialogue on human rights across the OSCE region. I would particularly like to thank Director Gisela Dottir and her team for her dedication and enthusiasm. I also highly commend them for the transparent and impartial manner in which ODIHR fulfills its mandate. I would also like to congratulate Italy on the excellent conduct of negotiations under the chairmanship. Your joint efforts and continued commitment enabled a successful organization of the conference. Ladies and gentlemen, the OSCE remains an exceptional forum for discussing all timely matters of Euro-Atlantic and Euro-Asian security system, arms control, economic and environmental issues, as well as human rights and democracy. Save Oleg Sentsov, we saw this slogan a minute ago. It is an idea which should be discussed here as well. We support very strongly the discussion on important human rights issues and pending issues to be resolved in countries of the OECD area. The persistence of conflicts in various regions of the OSCE area clearly shows that we need to bring the comprehensive approach to security to a new level. In order to effectively prevent conflicts, it is necessary to address the whole spectrum of problems, including in the economic and human dimensions. Implementing this cross-dimensional security also requires strong and independent institutions. In this context, I would like to underline ODIHR's essential role in strengthening democratic institutions and respect for human rights across the OSCE region. In cooperation with ODIHR, Poland has contributed to many projects regarding monitoring of elections, legal reviews, countering trafficking in human beings, or tackling hate crimes. We have greatly benefited from this cooperation. A side event entitled Building a Comprehensive Criminal Justice Response to Hate Crime, organized together with several other delegations on the margin of this year's meeting, is only one of a few examples of our excellent cooperation with the Office. We highly estimate the role of ODIHR in the area of election observation and the support of the Office to the OSCE states in developing legal mechanisms and good practices to ensure the quality and effectiveness of laws related to the human dimension issues. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an increasingly unpredictable environment. The OSCE has also been confronted with many challenges. In this difficult time, we should not forget that the OSCE's comprehensive security concept is all about human rights are the foundations on which we should build global peace and security. Regrettably, the common principles and values enshrined in the OSCE documents continue to be violated. We entered the 5th year of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, which is an example of a blatant violation of basic OSCE rules, territorial integrity, refraining from the threat or use of force, and inviolability of frontiers. The crisis in and around Ukraine has clearly demonstrated that the OSCE has a significant role to play when it comes to crisis management in Europe. We highly value the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, whose presence on the ground is instrumental in facilitating dialogue among the parties and in identifying the needs of the civilian conflict-affected population. We have to remember that the ongoing conflict in and around Ukraine and the illegal occupation of Crimea still pose the biggest challenge to the OSCE and to our common security. The organization's credibility will remain at stake unless the conflict is fully solved. Only return to the full respect of commitments in all three dimensions can render the OSCE the organization it was envisioned to be, a platform for constructive dialogue and trust. With this big goal in mind, we need to make better use of the existing instruments aimed at rebuilding trust and confidence. Poland will continue enhancing the Vienna document. Our aim is to improve risk reduction mechanisms, including those concerning dangerous military incidents and increasing military transparency. This spirit, we proposed practical, constructive steps in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, let us take the most from the opportunity that the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting is creating. This meeting remains the key mechanism to verify how the participating states implemented their human rights commitments. It is also a unique opportunity for states to cooperate with civic society representatives who play an invaluable role in defending the OSCE values. Democratic institutions, including free elections, fundamental freedoms, rule of law, preventing racism, xenophobia, intolerance and discrimination, combating trafficking in human beings, ensuring equal opportunity for women and men in all spheres of life. These are crucial topics of the conference. This year, Poland is celebrating the 100th anniversary of regaining independence. This reminds us that freedom requires responsible activity of the whole society towards ensuring full participation of all its members in the democratic processes. The complex history of Poland and our successful transition experience proves that efficient democratic institutions ensuring the fundamental freedoms such as freedom of the media and freedom of assembly, as well as strong and vibrant civic society, have a direct impact on the economic development and political stability. I hope that the upcoming 2 weeks will result in many practical recommendations. I wish you fruitful and constructive discussions, and I hope that they will also bring us closer to a consensus on issues introduced by the Italian chairmanship to be discussed during the Milano Ministerial Council in December. Thank you very much for your attention.
I would like to thank His Excellency Foreign Minister Čaputović for his statement. And now I will give the floor to Ambassador Assoni, Chair of the OSCE Permanent Council. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Grazie.
Thank you, Ingeborg.
Speak in Italian. Don't know if you noticed. A nome.
On behalf of the Italian chairmanship of the OSCE, I am delighted to welcome you at the meeting at which we will fulfill the commitments of the human dimension this year. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the Polish authorities and specifically to the Minister of Foreign Affairs for having welcomed this annual meeting and for the kind words spoken with respect to the Italian chairmanship. Let me also take this opportunity of the presence of the summit of the OSCE institution to express the gratitude of Italy to the Office for the Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of the OSCE and the appreciation for the constant commitment that they demonstrate to promoting fundamental rights at a critical period for the implementation of these commitments. The Italian chairmanship is convinced of the importance of the mandates of both ODIHR and the High Commissioner for National Minorities. Due to a lack of approval of the agenda of the Permanent Council in Vienna, and despite the actions taken by the Italian chairmanship, it was not possible, I repeat, to approve an agenda which, following months of negotiation, we were able to achieve a consensus on a text which was interrupted for reasons that are external to the negotiations themselves regarding the participation of civil society in this meeting. We know very well that participating states of the OSCE have in mind the importance of the participation of civil society. Unfortunately, there is no clarity on the interpretation and application of this principle. And so, following the Austrian chairmanship, we followed in the tradition of inviting all participants, promoting the interests of the OSCE 57 participating states. At the beginning of the year, we asked all participating states to demonstrate their responsibility, but it is only through this responsibility and the sharing of our responsibility that our organization can go forward. Since the very Helsinki Founding Act, the participating states have recognized the indissoluble link between peace and security. These principles, which have been established by our far-sighted founders, remain valid today. Democracy and rule of law are essential elements in order to ensure that our countries thrive and prosper. It is not possible to imagine that it is through repressing fundamental rights that we could ensure security. On the contrary, so this meeting is not one in which we put forward our national interests. Our focus is developing cooperation between participating states, and our commitments remain just as important today in a changed situation. The speed of modern communication systems and the multiplication of sources of information have led to challenges within our countries, and these challenges spread beyond our borders into the entire OSCE area. We have responsibilities towards each other. Human society and civil society is a fundamental pillar of our security. The principles that were announced in our founding texts of our organization have been completed over the years through political commitments and programmatic commitments that are very specific and that have promoted deep transformation in the OSCE area, bringing forward these shared standards from Vancouver to Vladivostok. The Human Dimension Implementation meeting is a unique opportunity for us to review the implementation of the commitments that we have taken. And in so doing, our analysis is enriched by dialogue with civil society and this shared responsibility that makes this such a special meeting. It is for this reason that we take this great responsibility and we decided to save this meeting. The OSCE is not merely an organization of participating states. It is also a community of values in which the ultimate goal is to realize the dignity of the human being. Italy adheres strictly to the values and principles that have inspired the OSCE and will continue to promote these values and principles, making the OSCE a fundamental tool for the promotion of peace and security. It is in this spirit that the Italian chairmanship has committed itself to promote the universality and indivisibility of human rights. In this year in which we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I believe that it is worthwhile repeating once again clearly that there is no place in this organization for any arbitrary interpretation or selective interpretation of rights. We are also making great efforts to contrast discrimination and intolerance. Fighting hate crimes is vital for the existence of healthy democracy, and it is in this spirit that our chairmanship has opened the International Conference on Anti-Semitism in the OSCE area, held last January in Rome, and we will continue in this commitment, hosting in October a conference on fighting intolerance and discrimination on religious grounds. We are assisted by the 3 special representatives of the chairmanship on tolerance and non-discrimination, Andrew Baker, Blanchonai, and Salvatore Martinez, who we will hear during this first week. In conclusion, the political, civil, social, and economic path of each country includes a full participation of women on the basis of equality in decision-making processes, in government, in education. And this must take place first and foremost as we counter decisively any form of violence against women. I hope that participating states are prepared to reinforce their cooperation, specific cooperation, in order to eradicate any form of physical or psychological violence against women. We believe that it is important to promote a common reflection within the OSCE area on countering trafficking in human beings with specific attention to women, children, and unaccompanied minors. This is a topic which Italy follows closely in other multilateral fora as well. We must also determine together how we can strengthen cooperation on the topic of migration in the OSCE area. The migratory routes have changed over the past 20 years, and the participating states have changed from being countries of origin, countries of transit, and countries of arrival of migrants. And so we must ensure security in our region in this respect. Let me conclude with the hope that the debate over these 2 weeks will be constructive, with the goal of finding common answers to common challenges. And I'd like to recall that our goal is to ensure collective security through an approach based on cooperation and mutual trust. Once again, let me conclude with the motto of the Italian chairmanship: dialogue, ownership, and responsibility. There are no shortcuts. Thank you.
I would like to thank Ambassador Razzoni for his statement, but allow me also to thank him on behalf of the chairmanship for a very close and constructive cooperation in the weeks and months leading up to this meeting. And now I give the floor to Mr. George Tsereteli, the President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. President, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Minister Čaputović, Ambassador Razzoni, dear Director Gisladotir, dear Mr. Desir, Ambassador Zanier, distinguished guests, Excellencies. It's a pleasure for me to be here today to represent the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly at the opening of this year's Human Dimension Implementation meeting. At the onset, let me thank the Italian chairmanship, of course, of the OSCE and the OSCE Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights for organizing this very important event. I'm happy that we are gathered today despite difficulties in agreeing to an agenda in the OSCE Permanent Council. Finding consensus is always a challenge. Even in the Parliamentary Assembly, we still have sharp disagreements. But what our experience shows, and you all know that as well, is that direct and constructive dialogue is always the best way forward. We are here entrusted by our citizens to solve problems and to find solutions to their complicated lives. And let us not needlessly and further obstacles to make obstacles, and I hope this is the spirit that everybody here will share and approach their work in the coming weeks. With that in mind, and with the aim of ensuring the efficient operation of our organization, the OSCPA has formulated and implemented several changes to the consensus rule. Those should perhaps be considered by participating states to strengthen the impact of the OSCE's work. Ladies and gentlemen, the Human Dimension Implementation meeting serves a crucial purpose in the work of the OSCE by bringing together in the same room representatives from civil society organizations and ambassadors from the OSCE countries, and it offers a unique opportunity to breathe grassroots energy into the work of the OSCE. All of us gathered today must recognize that a pluralistic and strong civil society is indispensable and to functioning democracy and vital to promote and protect human rights. Your participation in our work is most welcome. Of course, some countries will see their practices criticized during this meeting. Open dialogue on controversial issues must continue, and opposing views must be allowed to be heard by all in order to successfully work together towards implementing our commitments. Although some countries might feel singled out, the truth is that no one should be immune from well-grounded criticism. Reviewing the implementation of our commitments is something that should be done not only every year here in Warsaw, but every single day in our home countries. This should be at the heart of our political action. Distinguished guests, in many ways, this meeting is complementary of the work we undertake with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. All of you well know the human dimension is referred to as the third dimension of the OSCE's comprehensive approach to security. But I would say that the human dimension should always be our first priority. When we put out OSCE hats on, our primary goal is to better the lives of the more than 1 billion people of the OSCE area. Our duty to respond to their desire to live in a free society where democratic debate is encouraged and not stifled, where journalists are respected and not jailed or killed, where a simple citizen can trust that his or her voice counts and is not discarded. And so today, let me reiterate the political support of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly when it comes to implementing the human dimension commitments to which our governments have pledged. As representatives of the people, we are the critical link between the citizens and their governments. We are here to channel your concerns and work together to hold OSCE countries accountable. The OSCE Berlin Declaration adopted last July identifies several priority areas where greater attention is required to promote human security in the OSCE area. Let me here mention a few, which no doubt will be debated in greater detail over the coming days. The refugee and migrant crisis continues to occupy a prominent place on the international agenda and the work of the Parliamentary Assembly. This is the case not only in the Mediterranean, but also in North America, as we've seen in recent months. We believe it's the duty of the OSCE countries to protect the rights of migrants and refugees, especially their freedom from arbitrary detention. It is also our collective expectation that our governments refrain from forced returns of refugees and asylum seekers to countries where they could face torture or inhuman treatment. Together, we must actively work on the integration of refugees and protect their rights to family reunification, with particular consideration for women and accompanied minors. But above all, we must work together to stop the tragedies and hardship that force people to flee their homes. This requires all of us, NGOs, politicians, and administrators, to work in concert. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to also see there will be discussion on national minorities' rights issues during this meeting. There are a number of non-implemented commitments in this field that require attention, and working together with the High Commissioner Zanier and the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, we also plan to increase our efforts and contribution in this area. In an interconnected world increasingly characterized by the spread of disinformation and propaganda, we need to redouble efforts to promote media and digital literacy to increase the resistance to our societies to fake news. Allow me here to use this opportunity to also thank OSCE representative of freedom of media for his excellent work in countering this challenge. As we discussed in Berlin, there is an urgent need to restore the status of free and independent journalism as a central source of credible and reliable information to counter the growing international chaos. Finally, as one of the few publicly elected people in this room, I would like to bring your attention to the area of elections and to election observation in particular. Our debates in Berlin confirmed the growing concern over the proliferation of unprofessional and biased election monitoring, often promoted by host governments and national parliaments. This has unfortunate consequence of undermining public trust in election observation overall. Sitting here together today alongside the dear Director Gisela Dottir, let me underscore the highly valued work of the OSCE's election observation and its activities, characterized by political leadership underpinned by credible long-term analysis. Our organization possesses the strong asset recognized throughout the world, and we must do all that we can to continue to protect it. This also requires our organization to constantly refine its practices to avoid any possible appearance of conflict of interest or corruption. As we regularly ask from our national parliaments and our colleagues, we must also ask the OSCE participating states refrain from participating in observation activities which are neither transparent or based on a systematic methodology. Distinguished guests, over the next dozen days and maybe years, many creative ideas and practices will be shared here. I encourage all participants to seize this opportunity, really a unique opportunity for dialogue. But of course, discussions and debates will never be enough. Political will is necessary to put all these ideas into practice. The Parliamentary Assembly significantly stepped up its engagement with the HDIM this year, and 5 or 6 members of our Bureau, the leadership, will be in attendance. With this in mind, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly looks forward to working with all of our partners around this table today, participating states, OSCE institutions, the broader international community and the civil society to promote accountability and advance human security for all across the OSCE area. I wish you all a successful session and conference, and thank you very much.
Thank you, President Tsereteli, for your statement. And now I give the floor to the High Commissioner on National Minorities, Ambassador Lamberto Chanier. Please, you have the floor, Mr. High Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, Mr. Minister, dear co-panelists. I'm glad to have this opportunity to address the opening session of the H-Team. The themes discussed at the H-Team are of great relevance, not only for the organization at large, but also specifically for my own mandate and activities. As we observe across the OSCE area, increasing intolerance against diversity in our societies and the general trend towards nationalism and populism, we need to redouble our efforts to promote the sustainable integration of our societies, thus preventing instability, crisis, and ultimately conflict. And these worrying trends have been exacerbated by the increasing flows of refugees and migrants, which have put additional strain on our societies. And these developments require additional efforts to promote sustainable integration, and with a very strong accent also on the weaker and more exposed categories such as women and children. These developments make the mandate of the High Commissioner as relevant today as it was at the time of the creation of the institution, and this applies in particular to the relevance of the toolbox at the disposal of the Office of the High Commissioner. The series of guidelines and recommendations issued by my predecessors over the years represent a precious tool to influence and to help shape policies aimed at fostering peaceful and sustainable integration and protecting minorities from excessive politicization and instrumentalization by king states. There is also a need to uphold the rights of minorities whose identities in some instances threatened by assimilation policies. Next month, on the 2nd of October, we will present this set of guidelines to the member states of the United Nations at an informal event in the margins of the General Assembly. We are now organizing together with other partner regional organizations from other regions. And I look forward to an active participation by representatives of your countries to this event to help us present the achievements and the issues we face and compare notes with other regional organizations. At this meeting, minorities issues will be a central topic for discussion, specifically at the session on tolerance and non-discrimination next Friday. We will have the presence of prestigious speakers, and in particular, the UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, Professor Fernand de Varenne, and the former chairperson of the Advisory Committee of the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities of the Council of Europe, Professor Petra Rother. I would like to conclude by thanking you for your active support to my institution, to myself personally, and to confirm my intention to continue working with all of you on these important and delicate issues. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank High Commissioner Chanier for his statement. And now I give the floor to the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, Mr. Arlem Desir. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, dear Director of ODIHR, Mr. Minister, Mr. OSCE Chairperson in Office, Mr. President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Mr. High Commissioner on National Minority, Mr. Director of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, Excellencies, esteemed representatives of civil society, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be back in Warsaw for the Human Dimension Implementation meeting, where we will have a unique opportunity to discuss with our civil society partners and participating states the most pressing issues regarding media freedom in the OSCE region. If we look at the past year, it is clear that we face a very difficult and alarming situation regarding media freedom. Alarming because of a climate of hostility against the press in different parts of our region. Alarming because of the growing reluctance to accept the role of the press as a pillar of democracy in many countries. Alarming because several journalists have been killed since the last HDIM, provoking shock waves in their home countries and beyond. Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta, Jan Kuciak and his partner in Slovakia, Robert Yassen, Gerald Fishman, Wendy Winters, John McNamara, and Rebecca Smith of Capital Gazette in Annapolis, USA, Zachary Stoner, a journalist and videographer in Chicago, and I can add the mysterious death of Maxim Borodin falling from his apartments in Ekaterinburg in Russia. Many other journalists have been threatened, attacked, or even shot at, like Olivera Lakic in Montenegro and other journalists in the Western Balkans. The situation is also alarming because dozens of journalists have been prosecuted and more than 150 remain in jail in the OSCE region, most of them in a few countries, in Turkey and Azerbaijan. Journalists are often harassed because of their critical views or of their investigation on corruption. But more and more, we see that the simple fact of being a journalist makes you a target of threats and violence, and female journalists face particular threats and online harassment. We have also recently witnessed targeted attacks against the press coming from extremist groups during demonstrations like in Chemnitz, Germany. At the occasion of this HDIM, I want to sound an alarm. When the press is targeted, our democracy is targeted. I call on participating states to protect the safety of journalists and to reconfirm your OSCE media freedom commitments. At a time of high risk for journalists, I call to stop the vilification of the press. This creates a dangerous environment and makes journalists even more vulnerable. As we face new challenges through the dissemination of false information, fake news, and more dangerous manipulation of information, our priorities must be to support the professional press, to support quality journalism, to promote self-regulation and media literacy rather than censorship. Otherwise, we will be faced with the demise of the free and pluralistic press. I also want to underline that limiting access to information and free expression of opinion is working against the future of any country. Free flow of information and ideas goes with free flow of innovation. Those governments that close the information space or block websites and social media networks are just damaging the prosperity, the development, and the future of their own countries. They push ambitious, talented young people to leave. They discourage investors, academic research, and development. Anyway, there can be no freedom of expression and freedom of information without a free access to the internet. This is why we focus on internet regulation. Today, we see a number of legislative and policy initiatives to change the internet from an open space into a tool for controlling information and behavior. We have provided assistance to several participating states in developing better regulations through legal review and suggestions to ensure that the legislative framework will support the development of a free and vibrant media landscape. As a consequence of digitalization, media also face huge economic challenges. Collapsing incomes for legacy media outlets and the concentration of advertising in social media have become an existential threat to media plurality. Many participating states see the need to address this issue, and as always, I stand ready to assist them and to assist you with the expertise of my office. As stated in the mandate you gave me July last year, I will continue to raise with participating states each case of obstruction of media activities and unfavorable working conditions for journalists. I will make all efforts to continue engaging in a dialogue with participating states to advocate and promote full compliance with OSCE principles and commitments regarding freedom of expression and free media, to fight impunity and for the release of imprisoned journalists and the respect of pluralism and open access to information both online and offline. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome that freedom of expression is one of the special topics for this year's Human Dimension Implementation meeting. This is for all of us a great occasion to tackle hands-on the key issues and to strengthen our work together. I would like to thank the OSCE participating states, our partners, civil society organizations, as well as media freedom defenders for their cooperation. It is because of your work and commitment that together we can build a strong coalition and consensus to reverse the current dangerous trends. I'm very much looking forward to our discussions and exchanges during our media freedom sessions and side events. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the OSCE representative on the freedom of the media for his statement, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Čaputović, had to be excused, asked me to be excused because he had other obligations that he needed to attend to. Now I was supposed to give the floor to Ambassador Paul Beckers, the Director of the Office of the OSCE Secretary General, who was going to deliver a statement on behalf of the Secretary General Greminger. But unfortunately, the flight from Vienna was cancelled this morning, so he didn't make it here in time. So we have now finished the opening statements, and it is now the time has come to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Michael O'Flaherty, the Director of the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, and since December 2015. Previously, Michael O'Flaherty was established Professor of Human Rights Law and Director of the Irish Centre for Human Rights at the National University of Ireland. He has served as Chief Commissioner of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, and from 2004 to 2012, he was a member of the United Nations Human Rights Committee, latterly as a Vice Chairperson. He is currently Adjunct Professor of Law at the National University of Ireland, Maynooth. Mr. O'Flaherty, first of all, I would like to express our deep appreciation to you for your willingness to take this role with such a short notice, and I very much look forward to hear your speech. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madame Director. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honour for me to address this opening session of the 2018 Human Dimension Implementation meeting. And I would like to thank the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights for the invitation to share my thoughts with you this morning. At the outset also, I wish to acknowledge ODIHR as an invaluable partner to the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. As some OSCE participating state representatives will know, our joint efforts are very strong and strengthening at all times, such as in the context of the collection and recording of hate crime data. My agency also has closely supported the OSCE's Survey on Violence Against Women, which replicates our surveys in non-EU countries, broadening their scope. And we, in turn, have benefited from ODIHR's support and expertise in developing surveys on discrimination and hate crime against Jews, and in developing our online database of anti-Muslim hatred, just to mention some examples. I'm grateful for this close collaboration, which helps us to deliver on our mandate. Excellencies, 2018 is a year of human rights anniversaries. 25 years since the groundbreaking Vienna World Conference on Human Rights, and already 70 years since adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Just 2 days ago, I met with descendants of the chairperson of the Declaration's Drafting Committee, Eleanor Roosevelt. We agreed that the Universal Declaration has had a momentous impact for the protection of human rights, but we also acknowledged that there is still so very much to be done. In that regard, we were at one in observing how great are today's challenges. Indeed, we are at a moment in history where human rights law, what the late Pope John Paul II described as the greatest achievement of modernity, is under grave threat. Wherever we look, we can observe both the achievements and those threats. In this regard, the European Union is in no way spared. Please allow me to mention some of the dimensions of the human rights issues confronting the EU, and in so doing, I believe, I speak to experience also in other states in Europe and elsewhere. And I will concentrate my remarks on three contexts: migration, social integration, and the digitalization of our lives. The Fundamental Rights Agency is deeply engaged in supporting rights-compliant responses to the migration situation in the EU. We engage from the drafting process of EU law in Brussels to the operation of reception facilities in a number of states. We also publish periodic public reports on the migration-related human rights situation in the EU's 14 most impacted states. From these perspectives, we do observe considerable progress in the past 3 years in terms of the respectful treatment of migrants, for instance, in the area of law reform. However, many serious concerns remain to be addressed. Reception conditions are unacceptable in some locations. Child protection systems are sometimes inadequate. We receive too many reports of abusive behavior, and we have yet to trace thousands of missing unaccompanied children. Turning to the issue of the social integration of migrants and other minority groups such as Roma, again the story is a mixed one. Despite the existence in some places of well thought through and human rights respectful strategies, our data show pervasive impediments to integration. For instance, we are aware of frequent incidents of xenophobia or racism, ranging from everyday harassment to outright violence. This even targets citizens who have long resided in a given state. 1 in 4 respondents to a recent survey of ours reported having experienced hate-motivated harassment. And third, we in the EU share in the global phenomenon of the digitalization of life, with its attendant benefits for human well-being and its serious risks for the protection of human rights. We recognize the need for persistent vigilance and innovative strategies in order to protect the right of privacy. We also appreciate how the migration of highly sensitive personal data to digital platforms also engages very many other human rights beyond privacy. And we observe how cyber attacks, which target the systems where personal data are stored, have damaged citizens' trust in online activities and have left businesses and government struggling to keep up. Excellencies, in the European Union, we are fortunate to operate within a machinery equipped to address these persistent and disquieting threats. EU institutions and bodies, including the European Parliament and Council, devote much attention to human rights questions. This is, of course, also the case for the European Commission and most prominently for the Court of Justice of the European Union. We also have the benefit of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. Groundbreaking in many respects, the Charter includes specific protections not found in other international law instruments. All EU legislation and any measure taken in an area of EU competence, including at national level, must comply with the Charter. And this compliance is rigorously monitored by the European Commission and the Court of Justice. And finally, the simple existence of the agency I represent is an expression of the EU human rights commitments. The Fundamental Rights Agency is unique. There is literally no other body of its kind anywhere in the world. And our work, research, analysis, capacity building, is undertaken with the primary purpose of helping decision makers to devise rights-compliant law and policy. But no matter the architectural strength of the EU's human rights edifice, addressing the issues of the day requires the concerted effort of all of our member states. It is our clear and evident experience within the EU that to tackle the great human rights challenges, we must cooperate across borders. Today's threats to human rights know no frontiers. Safeguarding these rights means renewing our commitment to multilateralism and working together to ensure all people can live in dignity and security. In the field of migration, that means devising multilateral solutions to protect the fundamental rights of people in transit, as well as those who arrive on European shores. It means facilitating effective monitoring of forced returns. It means improving cooperation with state authorities, making full use of existing large-scale IT systems so they can contribute to the protection of human rights. Through it all, the existing safeguards enumerated in the Charter of Fundamental Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights must be respected. Multilateral engagement on integration is also underway, most notably as concerns the Roma. The EU has established a framework under which all member states are obliged to develop national Roma integration strategies, adopting measures funded under national as well as EU budgets. The EU has also established a monitoring system to assess progress over time, where my agency's periodic surveys on Roma integration play an important role. The European Commission, in its role of guardian of the EU treaties, has pursued infringement procedures against several EU member states for failure to implement the EU's Racial Equality Directive, where they found situations of systemic discrimination and segregation of Roma. However, here, I would caution against mistaking activity for achievement. The situation of the EU's Roma community, the largest minority in the Union, is very troubling. Take, for example, the extent of de facto segregation in the field of education, which shockingly is on the rise. The percentage of Roma children attending class where all other classmates are Roma increased on average from 10% in 2011 to 15% in 2016. Turning then to the digital sphere, the EU and its member states have come together to improve the security of network and information systems. The Court of Justice of the EU has made clear that the scope of data retention pursuant to the EU's Passenger Name Record Agreement and directives should be limited to what is strictly necessary. Member states will indeed need to work hard to match their national provisions implementing the groundbreaking General Data Protection Regulation in order to implement the principle of purpose limitation, as well as those of data minimization, data security, storage limitation, and accountability. And through the EU Directive on Security of Network and Information Systems, national authorities are hardwiring cooperation with national law enforcement and data protection authorities across the member states. Excellencies, any comments on truly effective response to our human rights challenges must make specific reference to the important role of civil society. Without NGOs and other CSO actors operating on the ground and in networks within and across borders, there will be much less information and input available to decision makers. Similarly, the activity of such groups is vital to the effective implementation of human rights, as they so often take the lead in providing supportive action, including for victims. It is only by ensuring the full participation of civil society actors and supporting their actions that we can ensure human rights are protected. In this regard, you may be aware of a recent report of my agency that draws attention to the challenges faced by civil society in the EU. As that report makes clear, the issues in the EU, although varying greatly in form and gravity from one country to another, nevertheless mirror the situation elsewhere. We are thus reminded of the need for close multilateral cooperation and exchange of good practice in support of a flourishing civil society sector. Madam Director, Excellencies, I began my comments by referencing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Please allow me to conclude by returning to that great text. The goal of all human rights efforts, whether in the EU or elsewhere, must be the delivery of the promise in Article 1 of the Declaration, promise of a world where all people are free and equal in dignity and in rights. In order to direct our efforts in that direction, we need to honour the fundamental principles of the Declaration. In other words, we must recognise that human rights are universal. Every person is born with and possesses the same rights, regardless of geography, gender, race, ethnicity, religious or cultural background. We have to acknowledge that human rights are inalienable. They can never be taken away. We need to uphold the indivisibility and the interdependence of human rights. All rights, whether civil, political, economic, social or cultural, are of equal importance. None can be fully enjoyed without the others. These are lofty requirements. But as 70 years of experience have shown, through strong national policies and close regional and international cooperation, they are entirely attainable. By working together between and among states, international and regional organizations, and with other partners, we will succeed in ensuring that our systems of human rights protection deliver dignity and security for all of our populations. Madam Director and Excellencies, I wish you a very productive series of meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Flaherty. Thank you so much for your insightful statement and for the food for thought that you have provided us with. It's very much appreciated. And now the time has come to open the floor to statements of delegations. And I just want to remind all the delegations that the number of speakers on the speakers list determines the allotted time for each statement. And we have calculated, based on the number of speakers that have asked for the floor, that their time is about 3 minutes for each speaker. And now I open the floor for the statements. And the first one to deliver a statement is Austria on behalf of the European Union. But let me just say that they get more time than 3 minutes, as they speak on behalf of so many delegations. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I pass on the floor to the representative of the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iceland aligned themselves with the statement. I will deliver a shortened version and the full text will be posted. Warm thanks to the Chairmanship in Office and to ODIHR for their thorough work in preparing and organizing this meeting, and in reply to the Italian Ambassador's opening statement, warm thanks to the Italian Chairmanship for their leadership and tireless efforts to have this meeting take place. Greatly appreciated. Indeed, year by year, we face increasing challenges in organizing the HDIM, the most important event in the human dimension. We have all committed to it, and we should all honor this commitment. We should be using it for an open and frank dialogue with each other, as well as with members of civil society, who are essential partners for the implementation of the human dimension commitments. Therefore, safeguarding the open character of the OSCE in relation to CSOs is of key importance. We continue to be concerned about the ongoing or even increasing restrictions on civil society, crackdown on human rights and fundamental freedoms, growing pressure on human rights defenders, intimidation, attacks and violence against journalists and other media actors, as well as increasing intolerance in many parts of the OSCE region. These worrying trends represent serious challenges to our comprehensive security, including human security. Strengthening the promotion and protection of human rights, civil society, the rule of law and international cooperation is the best investment we can make for the long-term comprehensive security of our societies. We strongly support the work of ODIHR in defending human rights and assisting in the implementation of our commitments, and we must all ensure that all OSCE autonomous institutions remain able to play their indispensable role in the implementation of commitments across the OSCE region. We'll now refer to specific country situations. We have expressed our grave concerns about the continuing application of the death penalty in the participating states that are still exercising it. And we urge the remaining countries maintaining the capital punishment to introduce a moratorium as a first step towards its abolition. We remain deeply concerned about the dire situation of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol since its illegal annexation by Russia. This includes the precarious situation of persons belonging to national minorities on the peninsula, in particular the Crimean Tatar community, which faces systematic persecution. We reiterate our unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, unity and independence. We remain firm in our call on all sides to swiftly and fully implement the Minsk Agreement in order to achieve a sustainable political solution in line with OSCE principles and commitments. We underline Russia's responsibility in this regard and yet again call on Russia to exert influence over the armed formations it backs to meet those commitments in full, including on the humanitarian front. We repeat our call on Russia to free all Ukrainian citizens illegally detained, put on trial or convicted in Russia or the Crimean Peninsula, including Oleg Sentsov. We remain concerned about the ongoing crackdown on civil society in Russia, the curtailing of rights and freedoms, the repression against opposition, and the shrinking space for independent media. We have joined the RFOM's call on Russia on a number of issues in the past year, from safety of journalists to legislative changes and judicial measures threatening freedom of expression online. These increasing restrictions on free speech are mirrored by persistent Russian use of disinformation as a destabilizing tool. We also raise concerns regarding violations of freedom of religion or belief, in particular the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses after they were banned on grounds of so-called extremism. We have repeatedly expressed concerns about the arrests, attacks, intimidation, and discrediting of human rights defenders and journalists working in the Chechen Republic. We're following closely the cases of Oyub Titiev and Yuri Dmitriev, calling on Russia to ensure full respect for their human rights and to release them immediately. Our concerns about reports of arrests, unlawful or arbitrary detention, torture, and killings of people in Chechnya based on their actual or alleged sexual orientation remain unanswered. The situation continues to fall below Russia's OSCE commitments and international human rights obligation. We continue to follow with great concern the deeply worrying backsliding in Turkey with regard to human rights and fundamental freedoms, democracy, and the rule of law. We have repeatedly called on Turkey to uphold the European Convention on Human Rights and respect the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. We will continue to follow ongoing procedures against journalists and other media actors, as well as human rights defenders, academics, writers, members of the opposition, parliamentarians, and others. We expect Turkey to refrain from adopting any new legislative proposals or restrictive measures that would invalidate any positive effect of the termination of the state of emergency. We have expressed our concerns about the situation in Azerbaijan. The recent decision to conditionally release opposition politician Ilgar Mammadov after over 5 years in prison was a welcome step. We expect the unconditional release and rehabilitation of all those currently imprisoned or under restriction of movement on political grounds, alongside the full implementation of the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. We reiterate our concern about continued pressure put on bloggers and media workers, including journalist Afgan Mukhtarli, and we reiterate our call on Azerbaijan to release him immediately, as well as all other bloggers and journalists prosecuted for carrying out their work. We express concern over some recent cases in Central Asia with regard to freedom of the media, while also noting some positive developments. We remain concerned about severe restrictions on human rights and fundamental freedoms, as well as attempts by the authorities to control civil society. We also underline the need to improve the human rights situation in participating states where protracted conflicts are persisting. It is the obligation not only of states, but also of non-state actors and those in control to guarantee and protect the human rights of all people. We are deeply concerned about the continuous deterioration of the situation in the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and renew our call to the Russian Federation to reverse negative trends such as the ongoing violations of freedom of movement, the continuing borderization process, closures of crossing points, restrictions of property rights and education in native language, and severe obstacles to the rights of displaced persons. Also within the EU, we are facing challenges in protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms, and our keynote speaker referred to those. The fight against discrimination and providing protection to refugees and asylum seekers are continuous priorities for us. We were all shocked by the recent murders of journalists in EU member states, which reminded us how important it is to continue the fight for a rule of law and fundamental rights also within our own courtyard. In conclusion, we look forward to a constructive meeting, engaging with representatives of all participating states and civil society in looking at our OSCE commitments and exchanging information and best practices. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I call upon the UK, followed by Ukraine, to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I fully subscribe, of course, to the statement made on behalf of the European Union, but I would like to add a few words in my personal capacity as I approach the end of my second and final year as Chair of the OSCE's Human Dimension Committee. Madam Chair, above all, I want to say how pleased I am to be here in Warsaw today. Diplomatic delegations and ODIHR have focused in recent days on questions about the organisation of this conference, and I express my sincere thanks and admiration to the Italian chairmanship and for making this event happen, and to you, Madam Chair, and your staff for putting arrangements for this complex event in place. It has not been straightforward, but it is very welcome that we are meeting today. Madam Chair, as Chair of the Human Dimension Committee with my highly dedicated team, I work to keep human rights and fundamental freedoms high on the OSCE agenda. OSCE participating states face new and evolving challenges in implementing our shared commitments, including, but not only, challenges related to technological change. That is why I attach so much importance to Human Dimension Committee discussions being topical, inclusive and relevant to the everyday lives across the OSCE region. Our 57 states, supported by the experience and institutions of the OSCE, including ODIHR, and informed by extensive dialogue with civil society, have unequalled potential to guide our region towards a future of cooperation and security based on shared principles and commitments. We have unique potential to learn together and to learn from each other for the benefit of all. HDIM is an important opportunity for learning and for increasing mutual understanding and reducing the mistrust that can lead to intolerance, discrimination and conflict. HDIM is also a chance to put the international spotlight upon human rights abuse, upon pressures on fundamental freedoms, human rights defenders, the integrity of democratic processes and space for civil society, and on the human consequences of state actions that violate international law and the rules-based international order. Madam Chair, 2018 is a year of important anniversaries, some already referred to this morning. And it is a good time to remind ourselves that sustainable security is indivisible from respect for rights and freedoms, and that intolerance and prejudice can have catastrophic consequences. So in conclusion, I recall that in 1990 in Copenhagen, states agreed that protection and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms and the development of society based upon pluralistic democracy and the rule of law were prerequisites for a lasting order of peace, security, justice and cooperation in Europe. That is why we are here today and why we need to protect and strengthen the OSCE human dimension. When we speak of human rights, we often speak of respect. I look forward to 2 weeks of discussion conducted with respect for each other and for the OSCE principles and commitments that have brought us here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I call upon Ukraine, followed by the USA, to take the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam Director, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. The delegation of Ukraine would like to acknowledge the efforts of the OSCE Italian chairmanship and the ODIHR in organizing this meeting. We also appreciate the efforts of the host country, Poland, in making our stay pleasant and hopefully effective. At the outset, I wish to point out that the seat next to me, that is the seat of Turkey, is vacant. Without contemplating on the reasons that prevented the absence of this delegation, I wonder if enough was done to address in a timely manner the concerns of this delegation and to manage them. The concerns of the delegation that is a good neighbor and partner of Ukraine at the time when there is another neighbor of Ukraine that sits here and that violates the whole body of the Helsinki principles, that launched an armed aggression against neighboring state, left more than 10,000 of people killed and wounded in the last 4 years, and continues to shell Ukrainians while we sit here in a group. Whereas imposing the false narrative and alternative facts. In the meantime, the Russian aggression against Ukraine continues inflicting gross human rights violations upon the population in the occupied territories. While last August we marked the 10th anniversary of the Russian aggression against Georgia, which also resulted in massive violations of the OEC norms and principles that remain uncorrected. My question is whether the OEC institutions and the all participating states did enough and were effective enough to bring the perpetrator to account and to relieve the plight of the people affected by Russian aggression both in Georgia and in Ukraine. These matters must lay at the core of our work in the human dimension as well. We must not allow the human dimension events to be abused by the aggressor state for the purposes of legitimization of the aggression in Georgia and in Ukraine and illegal occupation in both countries. To our regret and disappointment, the OEC conflict prevention mechanisms failed to avert and stop military aggression in Georgia and Ukraine, occupation and attempted annexation of parts of the territories of these countries. Nevertheless, for my country, the OEC remains a particularly useful organization, and we highly value the role of the OEC Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. With all the restrictions imposed by Russia and its proxies, it remains the only real monitor in the territory of the occupied Donbass, observing and documenting the abhorrent human rights violations taking place there. Distinguished delegates, we express our great concern about the health condition of Ukrainian citizen Oleg Sentsov, who has been on hunger strike for the last 120 days. He is currently serving a 20-year prison term on utterly fabricated charges of terrorism. We also call on the OEC institutions to use all possibilities to secure immediate release of the illegally detained Ukrainian citizens, political prisoners in Russia, including Alexander Kolchenko, Stanislav Klich, Mykola Karpyuk, Roman Sushchenko, Pavlo Grib, as well as Vladimir Balukh, Server Mustafayev. I need to continue despite the allocated minutes because I believe I have the right to that while my citizens are killed. In conclusion, let me note that the group therapy and counseling is important in treating addictions, both in the case of drug addicts and sometimes in the case of human rights abusers. However, when we deal with the violations that deserve attention of the International Criminal Court and are already examined by the tribunal in The Hague, I'm sure that we need to consider surgery when the criminal's ear remain deaf to the Council. And I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Now I call upon the U.S. delegation, followed by the Russian Federation, to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Last year, we called for the release of filmmaker Oleg Sentsov and other Ukrainian citizens held by the Russian Federation solely for peaceful activities. Mr. Sentsov is now in perilous health. Colleagues from the Russian Federation, release these prisoners. Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine contravenes all 10 Helsinki principles. Armaments-related sanctions will remain in place until Russia fully implements its Minsk commitments. Crimea-related sanctions will remain in place until Russia returns full control to Ukraine. Russia continues to occupy 20% of Georgia and supports separatism in the Transnistrian region of Moldova. Russia also engages in campaigns around the world to undermine election processes. Moscow's foreign agents law obstructs the work of Russian NGOs, including the Levada Center that does polling and Eco Defense Women's Council. The government's list of undesirable foreign organizations keeps getting longer. Respected rights organizations such as Memorial are threatened. Lawlessness is even more lethal in Chechnya. On August 30, the United States joined 14 other participating states in invoking the OSCE's Vienna mechanism. This requires Russia to provide a serious response to reports of appalling abuses of perceived LGBTI individuals, human rights defenders, and others. We look forward to receiving a substantive response. The United States' commitment to eradicating terrorism remains resolute, and we welcome equally determined partners. But it is counterproductive to commit human rights violations in the name of countering terrorism. When governments do not respect human rights, they foster grievances that terrorists can exploit. Governments that treat peaceful dissent as a threat do not strengthen security, they undermine it. We recognize the security challenges Turkey faces, but human rights must be respected. Over 50,000 Turkish citizens are being held. All those detained for exercising their fundamental freedoms must be released. These include Pastor Andrew Brunson and other U.S. citizens, as well as our locally employed staff. The government of Turkey knows full well it has no legitimate reason to hold them and is using them as pawns. Across our region, violent extremist groups espouse messages of hate. After the shocking violence in Charlottesville, Virginia last year, the United States brought formal criminal charges against an individual for killing a young woman named Heather Heyer. Attorney General Sessions said, and I quote, "Today's indictment should send a clear message to every would-be criminal in America that we aggressively prosecute violent crimes of hate that threaten the core principles of our nation." There's never any justification for anti-Semitism, for anti-Muslim and anti-Christian discrimination, for anti-Roma and other racist sentiment. LGBTI individuals, migrants, persons with disabilities all have human rights that must be respected. In 2 countries, the direction is encouraging. In Armenia, we are seeing reforms that bolster checks and balances, including judicial independence. We encourage this progress. Uzbekistan has embarked upon ambitious reforms. New legislation to match the intent of the reform agenda is needed and must be implemented. The United States will staunchly defend the independence, mandates, and budgets of OSCE institutions that work to ensure that civil society participation in HDM is not unduly restricted. To that end, we object to certain provisions of ODIHR's Code of Conduct, which include content-based restrictions on expression. We obviously do not agree with all of the ideas espoused here, which are often directed against my country. But we defend the right of civil society to express ideas with which we disagree. We should respond with alternative viewpoints, not censorship. The Code of Conduct should be revised. In conclusion, I wish to express the United States' deep appreciation to all the human rights defenders who've come here to HDM from across the OSCE region. Some of you have done so at considerable risk. Human rights defenders remain the heart of the Helsinki process. And Oleg Sentsov's heart still beats. Those who have the power to release him must act now when the time is still there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I call upon the Russian Federation, followed by Serbia.
Madam Chair, at the outset, let me say that the full text of our presentation will be submitted to the Secretariat. We must note with regret that in spite of all of our efforts, we still were not able to agree on an agenda for the key humanitarian OSCE meeting. We see this precedent as a breach of the rules of procedure of the HDIM and the OSCE's rules of procedure as a whole. Now, we see that the events at the OSCE area have shown that there is continuing to be a disbalance in the OSCE's human dimension area. Instead of a comprehensive assessment of the human rights situation throughout the OSCE area, once again, the focus has been shifted on individual countries. This is clearly seen in the work of the executive bodies of the OSCE, whose work needs to be accountable and transparent to participating states. It must be built in line with the overall bodies of the OSCE's decisions and their mandates. The priority focus of the OSCE needs to focus on the southeast of Ukraine. We are convinced that the internal Ukrainian crisis cannot be solved by military means. There's no alternative to its diplomatic settlement is the swift and strict implementation of the U.S. Security Council Resolution 2202/2015 of the Minsk Package of Measures from the 12th of February 2015. It needs to be implemented comprehensively and consistently. And regrettably, for years, Kiev has been sabotaging its fulfillment under the Minsk agreements and continues to avoid the direct dialogue with the representatives of certain areas of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. In Ukraine, we continue to see mass and grievous human rights violations against human rights and freedoms, first and foremost against the right to life. In the OSCE areas, we see waging systematic assault on the freedoms of expression, pressure against unfavorable media, persecution of independent journalists and members of NGOs who are investigating corruption by officials. The total Ukrainization policy is also breaching the language rights of ethnic groups. Intolerance against religions, xenophobia, neo-Nazism, racism are basic everyday occurrences in Ukraine. We are dismayed by the absence of any real reaction from the OSCE by the breaches of the Ukrainian authorities against their international obligations. The falsification of the history of World War II, glorification of Nazis and their henchmen is not only taking place in Ukraine. Former SS and their admirers are an annual event in Latvia and Estonia. Here in Poland and other countries, there is a war waged on the monuments to those who liberated us from fascism. Now, this has also become an everyday event. We call upon the commissioner of the OSCE in this area to pay attention to this. We need to have a comprehensive and impartial monitoring of Russian speakers in Latvia and Estonia, and to do away with the linguistic cleansing in the Baltic areas, as well as in other areas of the CE when the Russian-speaking minority is being discriminated against. In sports, also, discrimination is on the rise against individual countries, which is also a breach of the Helsinki Final Act. Sports should remain outside of politics. There's great concern with regard to the double standards or the organization of participating states with regard to the expression of opinion. We're talking about persecution of media and journalists and the constraining measures against their individual points of view, bans on travel, and denial of access to events open to the press. This is very topical in the context of Crimea, which in 2014 returned to the Russian Federation as a result of their right to self-determination through the result of the referendum. Blatantly distorted statements and misinformation, especially by those who do not know the situation in the region, continue to flood the media in the West.
Please wrap up.
In order to help you to understand exactly what is happening in the Crimean Peninsula with regard to media freedom, tomorrow on the 11th of September from 1 to 3 p.m. in room 2, there is going to be an event with the participation of Crimean journalists. You'll have a unique opportunity to hear information firsthand and to ask them questions. We also call upon the implementation of the Basel ministerial meeting of 2014 decision with regard to the oblation of ministerial declarations against discrimination and intolerance against Muslims, Christians, and the followers of other religions. In conclusion, I would like to recall that in the humanitarian work of our organization should be guided by a unifying agenda, together with equal dialogue and constructive cooperation of all participating states.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I call upon Serbia, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you. Madam Chair, the delegation of the Republic of Serbia expresses its gratitude to the Italian chairmanship for its dedicated efforts to convene this year's Human Dimension implementation meeting, as well as to ODIHR and our Polish hosts for their traditional generous hospitality. We believe that Human Dimension implementation meetings, as one of the largest annual human rights forums, present an invaluable opportunity for discussing the progress made by our governments in implementing our Human Dimension commitments. The great value of this meeting also stems from the indispensable participation of civil society alongside the representatives of the participating states giving us all the opportunity to express our concerns and make valuable recommendations. Moreover, we consider that strengthening the cooperation with civil society and promotion of its active involvement would contribute to further implementation of OSCE commitments in the third dimension. In the previous period, some participating states have expressed their interest in improving the implementation of relevant OSCE modalities of participation of civil society representatives to the OSCE activities, in particularly to human dimension events, in order to preserve the efficacy of the OSCE in supporting stability and security. As chair of the newly created informal working group on participation of civil society, our delegation would very respectfully like to encourage all participating states to actively contribute to constructive debate on this very important and equally sensitive issue in order to achieve an understanding on the way forward and to improve our work and effectiveness of the organization. We would also like to underline the important role of the OSCE institutions as one of the key elements of the OSCE human dimension, especially having in mind that only strong and professional institutions are able to support participating states in addressing challenges and implementing their OSCE commitments. Therefore, we have to support them in the fulfillment of their respective mandates, especially nowadays when threats to security are largely present in the entire OSCE region. Lately, we have witnessed worrying trends of intolerance, discrimination, and hate crime, targeting specific groups: migrants, refugees, national and other minorities. The crisis and protracted conflicts within the OSCE region that directly affect human rights and fundamental freedoms are becoming more frequent and increasingly complex. Therefore, we need to invest all possible efforts to find the peaceful and comprehensive solutions to rebuild trust and confidence within the OSCE and to further implement our commitments. We believe that additional efforts should also be invested in the implementation of the human dimension commitments in many areas, such as the rule of law, promotion of tolerance and non-discrimination, protection of rights of persons belonging to national minorities, freedom of religion or belief, freedom of expression and freedom of the media, including protection of journalists, freedom of assembly and association, rights of refugees and IDPs, to name only a few.
Ambassador, can you please wrap up? Time is out.
All right, I will wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, and then I call upon Switzerland, followed by France.
Thank you, Madam Director. Switzerland welcomes the decision of the Italian chairmanship to hold the 2018 HDIM. Thank you to Ambassador Azzoni for his leadership. We are happy to be here in Warsaw today and participate in the most important OSCE meeting of the year related to the human dimension. We thank the Polish authorities for welcoming us once again in Warsaw, and we thank ODIHR for organizing our meeting on such short notice. We are at a critical moment in the OSCE where decisions are often blocked and discussions highly politicized, and we are spending much effort in Vienna trying to achieve consensus. Vienna is indeed the place where we should discuss about our organization's decisions and modalities. This morning and during these 2 weeks, we would like to talk about something else. With or without a formal agenda adopted, we will talk about the substance. We are here to talk about human rights. We owe it to our citizens, whom are witnessing everywhere a shrinking of the democratic space and a restriction of fundamental freedoms. We owe it to civil society organizations with which we want to engage constructively, and we owe it to ourselves, the participating states, and to our commitments. Human rights violations are security concerns and need to be acknowledged as such. Human rights violations are often the first signs of imminent armed conflict, and conversely, conflicts lead to massive human rights violations. The OSCE, as the largest regional security organization with its comprehensive approach to security, must place human security at the forefront of its work. The situation of human rights defenders in the OSCE area is worsening and worrying, and so is the working conditions for journalists. Torture and ill treatments are still widespread. These trends and many others are unacceptable. Madam Chair, the participation of civil society organizations adds value to our discussions at HDIM, and we can only benefit from their crucial role in monitoring the implementation of human rights, maintaining a constant watch over violations, and their role as liaison between the concerns of the population and the governments. Citizens are often losing faith in governments all over the world. We must hear these voices. We must understand why it is the case, and we must react. Madam Chair, in closing, let me reiterate Switzerland's full support to ODIHR, the RFOM, and the HCNM, and in particular to you, Madam Director, as well to Ambassador Désir and Zanier for their crucial work. The three autonomous institutions have been established by the OSCE participating states in order to support us in the implementation of OSCE commitments, but also to point out violations of these commitments. We are looking forward to constructive discussion during these 2 weeks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you to Switzerland. Now I call upon France, followed by Canada.
Merci. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. In this year of the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, this meeting on the human dimension of the OSCE is especially important. On behalf of my country and with reference to the statement of the European Union, I'd like to thank the Italian chairmanship for all of the efforts made together with you so that this meeting could be held. We consider that this human dimension implementation meeting is an OSCE meeting and a meeting of the human dimension in the full measure in keeping with the OSCE rules, and we call upon all participating states to respect the jurisprudence and the practices of the OSCE in promoting fundamental freedoms and the security of each individual and citizen in the OSCE. From OSCE area from Vancouver to Vladivostok, France will promote the principle of universality of human rights and freedom of expression, freedom of the media, the safety of journalists, and the fight against all forms, and I repeat, all forms of intolerance and discrimination. In this respect, each person here must adhere to these principles. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I call upon Canada, followed by Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Director, Excellencies, colleagues, and representatives of civil society. As Canada's permanent representative to the OSCE, I'm very pleased to be joining you once again this year for the opening of the Human Dimension Implementation meeting, a meeting that I and our delegation see as an integral part of the OSCE's human dimension commitments made by all participating states. In the interest of brevity, let me say that Canada shares many of the concerns raised by other speakers, particularly with regard to the attempted illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol, ongoing Russian involvement in the war in Ukraine, the detention of Oleg Sentsov, as well as the deteriorating human rights situation in Chechnya. Madam Director, every year we meet here together in accordance with our OSCE Permanent Council decision number 476, committing all permanent states to the holding of HDIM annually, and are again faced with the stark reality that human rights and fundamental freedoms in many participating states are under threat. In many places, the space for civil society is shrinking. Democracies and democratic institutions are at risk. The free media is being curtailed, and journalists face threats to their personal safety for exercising their rights. The rule of law is challenged, and political interference with the judiciary is rising. Intolerance and discrimination persist, often based on what an individual believes. The freedom to express oneself, to peacefully assemble, and to associate continues to be threatened and restricted. Gender inequality remains pervasive. Racism and xenophobia plague many of our societies and our citizens, and these fears are being exacerbated for political ends. But to all these sobering facts, we must also acknowledge the vitality and importance of this meeting, the responsibility we all have in fighting for human rights and fundamental freedoms together, and the extremely positive role played by the OSCE's autonomous institutions, which are essential actors in this effort. For these reasons and more, Canada values this meeting and what it can achieve. It is the largest human rights conference in Europe and the only major human rights conference that involves civil society participation on an equal footing with government representatives. It represents a unique opportunity each year to gather as diplomats, civil society representatives, activists, and journalists to face these threats head-on, to strive for the ideals and commitments that were first enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act and subsequently strengthened. The gains made since 1975 are being seriously tested as many participating states ignore or dismiss the commitments they have made. Worryingly, failure to uphold these commitments is often distorted in such a way as to be met with indifference or even support rather than disapproval. This meeting is vital in enabling the citizens of those states to speak out against the contraventions of those commitments and to call on all of us to uphold our obligations. Madam Director, my delegation will play an active role in working sessions and will have much to say about the concerns I have raised about the importance of abiding by and upholding our shared OSCE commitments, and we will continue to espouse our firmly held beliefs in the value and necessity of diversity, peaceful pluralism, and the respect for all human rights. But most importantly, we are looking forward to hearing from civil society and engaging with civil society representatives during the side events and at breaks. It is essential that we hear and listen to your voices to identify concrete ways that we can work towards better implementation of our shared commitments in the human dimension. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I give the floor to Armenia, and after that it's Norway.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Madam Chairperson, every year we get together in Warsaw to reaffirm the importance of our human dimension commitments by mutually monitoring each other, sharing good practices, and getting feedback from civil society. The 2018 has been an important year for Armenia. The revolution of love and solidarity marks a critical juncture for promoting and protecting human rights in Armenia. The democratic movement evolved in the environment of respecting freedom of association, assembly, and media, and got accomplished by realization of the most important right, the right of people to take part and form the government. A societal consensus on human rights, good governance, and democracy is one of the most important outcomes and assets of the Armenian Revolution. There was no any geopolitical context therein, as human rights do not exclusively belong to any state, any single state, group of states, or civilization. Human rights are universal, and aspirations to enjoy them can have a universal appeal for all peoples. We hope that all participating states can agree with this assessment. The OSCE commitments have always served as important reference points for all stakeholders in Armenia. We acknowledge the role of the OSCE institutions and particularly the OSCE Yerevan office in building a positive agenda towards the implementation of the OSCE commitments. Despite the closure of the office against the will of hosting state, Armenia explores the ways of cooperating with the organization in other frameworks, such as Armenia Cooperation Program. Nonviolence has been another important feature of the Armenian Revolution. It shows that crisis situations can be resolved based on non-use of force, peaceful dialogue, and self-determination of people. Armenia pursues these principles in the context of protracted conflicts as well. We regret that despite our strong efforts, human rights and fundamental freedoms throughout conflict cycle will not be thoroughly examined in a separate session due to the objection of handful participating states. Having a separate session on human rights in the conflict environment would have allowed us to go into substantial discussion on the human rights of members of all groups affected by conflict. It could have also prevented attempts of covering up poor human rights record by referring to the conflict-related issues under all agenda items, something that we were increasingly witnessing in recent years. Last but not least, we took note with concern continued attempts of some participating states to limit space of civil society, not only within their respective countries, but in the HDM as well. The space of civil society has already been limited by existence of numerous gongos, and possibility to censorship the participation of dissenting voices can severely undermine the relevance of this truly unique gathering. Armenia looks forward to safeguarding the freedom to be heard in HDM in close cooperation with all interested participating states. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I give the floor to Norway, that's followed by Germany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I join colleagues in thanking the Italian chairmanship for its tireless efforts to make HDM take place. And I also wish to thank ODIHR and Director Ingebjørg Gisladottir for their admirable preparations under complex circumstances. No democracy is flawless. Democratically elected governments must strengthen the resilience of the democracy that brought them to power, not undermine it. And we are concerned that some participating states have moved in the wrong direction. There is an imperative of equality for all, without which the human rights cannot be fully realized. And we must continue to stand up for equal opportunities for and empowerment, inclusion and participation of women and girls. The Human Dimension Implementation Meeting is important, both as a platform to receive feedback from civil society and to exchange best practices and debate challenges in implementing our Human Dimension commitments. ODIHR is an essential institution for the promotion of democracy, rule of law, human rights, tolerance and non-discrimination in our region. And we need autonomous institutions to safeguard the rights of all individuals, even in electoral democracies. The success of ODIHR depends upon participating states recognizing the importance of protecting and maintaining its autonomy. 3 specific topics have been selected for this HDM. By recognizing their importance, we must not forget the paramount importance of the fundamental freedoms that form the backbone of the human rights. We are concerned that anti-Semitism continues to be alive in Europe, and in particular that there appears to be an increase in violence. This clearly calls for an intensification of efforts to target the specific groups responsible for such acts. The freedom of the media is under threat throughout the world, including in the OSCE region. Journalists and media workers face great risks in order to disclose corruption and abuse of power, to expose violations of human rights and provide the public with information. As governments, we must do our utmost to ensure that journalists are safe and enjoy rightful protection in the OSCE area, and media is free to fulfill their independent societal mandate. On migration, we call on the participating states to support a global compact for migration that will enable us to improve the governance on migration based on burden and responsibility sharing between countries of origin, transit and destination. Many members of our civil society organizations are present here today, and they are human rights defenders and have a key role to play in strengthening respect for human rights in our region. Standing up for human rights in the face of danger and repression requires tremendous courage, especially when some governments, whose responsibility it is to protect and implement human rights, impose laws and policies that do the opposite. We commend and applaud the work of our region's human rights defenders and look forward to hearing their recommendations. And this is particularly important when we are experiencing that some organizations, under the guise of the principles of free expression, tolerance and non-discrimination, use HDM to express intolerant views while lamenting the freedom of expression of others. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I call upon Germany, followed by Tajikistan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Your Excellencies. Let me first thank ODIHR and the Italian chairmanship for their leadership in organizing the biggest annual conference on human rights in Europe. The comprehensive program over the coming 2 weeks and the variety of topics show the challenges we face in the third dimension. Unfortunately, we've seen violations of the OSCE commitments and fundamental principles again and again over the past years. It is therefore of utmost importance to discuss together on an eye-to-eye level current shortcomings? How do we improve compliance with these principles? How to renew commitments to them? It is symptomatic that we have not been able to pass a decision in the third dimension during the last ministerial councils, and I hope we will do better this year. A shrinking space for human rights would lead to a more unstable and insecure society, threatening international peace and security. The guarantee of human rights and fundamental freedoms, as well as strong civil society, are the cornerstones of security and stability. This is why the human dimension is a fundamental pillar of our comprehensive security concept. We highly appreciate the participation of representatives of the civil society in this annual conference. The constructive dialogue with civil society is a win-win game for all of us. Sharing good practices amongst us can help reduce potential conflicts within our societies, making them more equal, stable, and thus secure. As a country with strong commitments to mainstreaming human rights issues, we recognize the interrelation between the protection of human rights, equal opportunities, the preservation of international peace and security. The nexus between human rights and security is a crucial aspect of conflict prevention. As a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council in the years 2019-20, Germany will work towards the full implementation and further development of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We will want to focus on the inclusion of women in peace and security, as well as on the issues of children in armed conflict, a topic we focused on before during our Security Council membership 2011 and 12. We will strive to enhance the human rights dimension of the efforts of the United Nations Security Council, also by building upon the work done by regional organizations like the OSCE and civil society stakeholders. The OSCE provides an appropriate platform to promote the role of women in conflict prevention, peace talk, reconstruction, reconciliation, particularly in post-conflict situations. Next to gender equality, we as participating states have to commit ourselves to a comprehensive catalogue of human rights and democracy norms, such as fundamental freedoms, rule of law, migration, tolerance, and non-discriminations. But we should not look at human rights isolated from the other dimensions. Only if we stay committed to all three dimensions and build upon our ability to find consensus even in difficult circumstances, we can improve trust in one another and thus strengthen the operative capacities of the OSCE. Germany remains committed to strengthening the human dimension based on the values and principles we subscribe to. Therefore, Germany highly appreciates the work of the institutions and committees of the human rights dimension and has regularly supported their work with extra budgetary funding. We will continue to do so in the future and to work towards a successful ministerial council in Milano in all dimensions. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Tajikistan, followed by Liechtenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, distinguished participants. Yesterday, Tajikistan celebrated the 27th anniversary of its independence. In a relatively brief period, my country has been actively cooperating with the OSCE and its institutions such as the ODIHR. We place great importance on our cooperation in the human dimension. In this framework in Tajikistan, a number of projects have been implemented. One of the important results of our cooperation with the OSCE is the successful holding in May of this year in Dushanbe of an international conference at the high level on issues related to the fight against terrorism and violent extremism. Our cooperation with the OSCE and its institutions testifies to the fact that Tajikistan has always supported and continues to implement its commitments in strengthening peace and security and promoting human rights. Distinguished participants, in our rapidly changing world, we see an expansion of the activities of international terrorism and extremism, the activization of radical elements, and the attraction of youth into extremist and terrorist organizations. Existing problems are intensifying also because often in assessing the activities and goals of individual terrorist groups, the interests of certain forces prevail. As a result, terrorists are divided into good and bad, and on the pretext of protecting human rights, double standards are applied. Tajikistan has always supported and continues to support the active participation of civil society in human dimension meetings. However, we consider it unacceptable for political parties and movements charged in OSCE countries with committing serious crimes and terrorist acts and with advocating hatred and intolerance to participate. A clear example of these is the terrorist extremist organization, the Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan. Their participation in terrorist activity in Tajikistan has been proven by much evidence and testimony, and they use the ODIHR Tribune in order to promote their goals. The current rules of procedure of ODIHR on the participation of civil society in human dimension meetings are not in keeping with current realities. In this connection, we consider timely the initiative of the Italian chairmanship to create an informal working group in order to find mutually acceptable ways to implement the corresponding articles of the Helsinki Final Act. We believe that the Tribune of the OSCE and the ODIHR should be used to strengthen cooperation between states in order to promote tolerance and to protect human rights, as well as to bolster unity in our common fight against global threats and challenges. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I give the floor to Liechtenstein, followed by Spain.
Thank you, Chair. At the outset, I would like to thank the Italian chairmanship and ODIHR for organizing this year's HDIM and the Polish government for the continuous hospitality it extends to the participants of this meeting. In many OSCE participating states, sustained pressure on human rights and fundamental freedoms persists. Particularly worrying is the threat to basic rights in areas of conflict. We would like to commend ODIHR for its important work and its support to participating states in strengthening and furthering democracy and the rule of law across the region. In the challenging environment, it is essential that the participating states support ODIHR's work also by taking timely decisions on its budget. Liechtenstein has been consistently assisting ODIHR through voluntary contributions to the Human Rights and Terrorism Programme and the Legislative Review Fund. Liechtenstein has also supported the new HDIM registration system. This was necessary to allow ODIHR provide a more user-friendly system that contributes to a more orderly and transparent participation while maintaining the meeting's nature as a platform for dialogue and networking. For some time now, the work on the OSCE's human dimension and HDIM in particular has been influenced and hampered by the discussion on the participation of civil society organizations in OSCE events. We welcome the efforts of the Austrian and Italian chairmanships to address this issue. Clearly, CSOs should be prevented from abusing or contravening OSCE human dimension commitments. However, limitations to their engagement have to be kept in line with the defined rules. Liechtenstein is concerned about the growing use of hate speech by individuals, but also by CSOs throughout the OSCE area. This threat to democracy and social peace needs to be addressed with resolve by the OSCE community. Strengthening human rights in Liechtenstein is a priority of the government. The annual dialogues with civil society and their inclusion in the Universal Periodic Review report, the establishment of a national human rights institutions, as well as efforts to better integrate migrants and asylum seekers, are mechanisms that have been put into place by the Liechtenstein government in order to continuously further human rights. Chair, human trafficking and modern slavery are among the biggest human rights scandals of our time. Combating these crimes is a major global challenge with particular relevance in the OSCE area. That is why Liechtenstein has initiated, together with international partners, an international multi-stakeholder commission that will elaborate a set of measures to target financial flows associated with human trafficking and modern slavery in order to fight impunity and end these crimes. The so-called Financial Sector Commission will officially be launched later this month in New York. We look forward to a constructive HDIM with valuable contributions. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Spain, followed by Slovenia.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. To add to what was said by the European Union in its statement, I also would like to make a number of comments as representative of Spain. Madam Chair, distinguished colleagues, in representing civil society, the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, that my country also is a member of, has recalled the regional mechanisms that are needed in order to provide for fundamental rights respect. This annual meeting of the HDM is the most important regional event with regard to the rule of law, democracy, and fundamental rights. Here I would like to thank the Italian chairmanship for their leadership and all of the efforts that they have been making to ensure that this meeting should take place today. Madam Chair, you can count on our support. I also would like to thank you for all of the preparatory work that has been done for this meeting. Especially, I would like to thank the director of ODIHR and its team. In spite of the difficulties we faced in organizing today's meeting this year, we do hope that all of these challenges will be overcome swiftly. Exchanges and sharing with other participating states, with citizens and civil society, all of this is of crucial importance in order to resolve our problems linked to the human dimension. And it is in line with our conviction, and that shared values enable us to bolster our solidarity. So we must respect the minimal rights of all. We must ensure that many of the steps that we have been able to take have been done thanks to human rights and our achievements. And they are being called into question. That is the rule of law, accountability, as well as guarantees and democratic pluralism, the freedom of association. All of these are undermined in many places today. There is a rise of insecurity amongst journalists, gender equality, which in many of its aspects for us is fundamental, is today unequally applied in many regions. Xenophobia and intolerance means that we
Privarnos de esta ocasión privilegiada de examinar el mejor modo de los problemas en
we have not been able to meet these commitments. We have a technical problem with a microphone. However, we must make sure that we sign up to the fundamental commitments in human rights, which are the fundamental foundation of the OSCE. All citizens must take advantage of taking part in this meeting, and so that we make sure that ODIHR meetings and HDIM meetings should continue in the future so that we can be efficient with regard to our commitments in the human dimension. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And interpreters do apologize. There was a bit of a technical problem in the middle of the speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Director. Slovenia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the EU delegation. We would like to thank the Italian chairmanship and ODIHR for organizing this year's Human Dimension implementation meeting. We regret that the consensus on HDIM agenda could not be reached in spite of all of the efforts, invested time and energy by the Italian chairmanship. We have all committed to hold this meeting on an annual basis, and our delegation looks forward to interesting discussions in the next 2 weeks. In conclusion, let me reiterate that Slovenia considers this year's HDIM is taking place with the exact same status as in previous years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I call upon Sweden, followed by Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Madam Director and Madam Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Sweden aligns, of course, with the statement made earlier on behalf of the European Union. And in addition, I would like to make the following remarks in my national capacity. All participating states have committed to hold the Human Dimension implementation meetings annually, unless a review conference is taking place. This meeting forms an essential component of our work within the OSCE. HDIM is direly needed for states to be held to account on how they implement their commitments, and also as a venue for the voices of civil society to be heard. Sweden fully supports the decision of the Italian chairmanship in office to proceed and hold the meeting, also in the current circumstances, as HDIM has been recognized by all participating states as a central element in promoting compliance with OSCE commitments. We consider that the HDIM takes place with the exact same status as in previous years. And finally, a big thank you to you, Madam Chair and Director, and your team for preparing this year's HDIM meeting. We are looking forward to fruitful discussion in the coming weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I call upon Kazakhstan, followed by the Holy See.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Уважаемая госпожа председатель.
Madam Chair, distinguished participants of the meeting, the delegation of Kazakhstan would like to express our thanks to the ODIHR and the Italian chairmanship for organizing today's event. The human dimension for Kazakhstan remain key in such areas as combating all forms of intolerance and discrimination. Our level of activity has been confirmed by the constructive dialogue between Kazakhstan and MDH on issues that strengthen the further process of democratization in Kazakhstan. The organization's recommendations have been taken up, and many of them are being implemented, including in setting it down in the laws of our country. For example, Kazakhstan has become a full-fledged subject of international law and participates in 60 international multilateral agreements in human rights, as well as the main international instruments in the protection of human rights. A key in our national system of human rights protection is included with the work with civil society who support the elaboration of institutes of civil society in the country. Currently, in Kazakhstan, we've created a dynamically growing national system for the protection of human rights. One of its key elements is the Commission on Human Rights under the supervision of the President. It is a consultative body and assists the President of Kazakhstan in the execution of his role as a guarantor of rights of people and citizens. The participants of the Council have been formed in line with the guiding principles of the UN, which is based on the work of national organizations, civil human rights societies as well. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan has had a consultative body, which is a dialogue platform on the human dimension. It includes human rights organizations and heads of certain state agencies. On this platform, we work with national NGOs in the area of human rights and democracy. This platform also includes representatives of the OSCE and the United Nations and from the European Union, amongst other organizations. Since it started working, there have been over 20 meetings of this body, out of which the results were 50 roadmaps that were drafted. In conclusion, I would like to note that Kazakhstan is committed to the further elaboration of constructive cooperation with OSCE and other international organizations and human rights institutes. The delegation of Kazakhstan would like to once again express our gratitude to the Italian chairmanship for the wonderful organization of today's meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I call upon the Holy See, followed by Uzbekistan.
Thank you. I am going to read out a shorter version of the statement. The entire version will be distributed in due course. Madam Chair, The Holy See has to note with regret that after 3 ministerial council meetings in Belgrade, Hamburg, and in Vienna, which passed without consensus on any ministerial council decision or declaration in the human dimension, the participating states were unable to reach consensus on the agenda of this HDIM. While a number of factors have contributed to this state of affairs, discussions during the past few years have clearly demonstrated that the participating states hold diverging and at times contradictory positions concerning human dimension issues. This applies not only to specific issues, but also to the very understanding of our consensually agreed upon commitments related to universal human rights and fundamental freedoms. This reality is open and sometimes openly and sometimes painfully on display during the human dimension events, where all delegations and civil society organizations express a desire for the increased protection and advancement of human rights and fundamental freedoms, but often end up in unhelpful mutual accusations based on highly selective approaches to human rights and fundamental freedoms. Our failure to recognize this state of affairs and adequately deal with it can turn these last years from being an unfortunate occurrence to a lasting reality in the OSCE. My delegation believes that a new impetus is needed based on the fact that we, the states of our organization, form a community not only of values, but also of responsibility, not just for the common good of the OSCE area, but also for the day-to-day work within the organization. The solution is obvious. The 57 OSCE participating states need to unite around a common understanding of OSCE commitments in the third basket, as well as on the universal principles of human rights and fundamental freedoms that underpin the human dimension. The lack of such a shared understanding, reflecting a common view or approach, has consequences for security and cooperation among states. Pope Francis noted this when he pointed out that, and I quote, particularly in the wake of the social upheaval of the 1960s, the interpretation of some rights has progressively changed, with the inclusion of a number of new rights that not infrequently conflict with one another. This has not always helped the promotion of friendly relations between nations, since debatable notions of human rights have been advanced that are at odds with the culture of many countries. The latter feel that they are not respected in their social and cultural traditions, and instead neglected with regard to the real needs they have to face. Somewhat paradoxically, there is a risk that in the very name of human rights, we will see the rise of modern forms of ideological colonization by the stronger and the wealthier, to the detriment of the poorer and the most vulnerable. At the same time, it should be recalled that the traditions of individual peoples cannot be invoked as a pretext for disregarding the due respect for the fundamental rights proclaimed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. End of quote. In conclusion, while wishing all organizers and participants at this 2018 HDIM fruitful discussions and assuring everyone of the Holy See's constructive engagement during the next 2 weeks, my delegation hopes that these few considerations will be helpful in our common work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Monseigneur. Now I give the floor to Uzbekistan, followed by Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you very much, distinguished Madam Moderator. The delegation of Uzbekistan expresses the hope that this will be a positive and constructive meeting. The world has entered a new era, that of globalization, and of course this means that we are required to create a modern system of international relations. It's logical that the problems that arise both globally and at the regional level must be resolved together. Currently, there is a need for us to form a new paradigm of cooperation, including strengthening democratic institutions and human rights. With respect to these issues, the delegation of Uzbekistan believes that a large role should be played by authoritative organizations such as the OSCE. These organizations can be the leading force in ensuring the protection of rights and freedoms in the human dimension. The OSCE creates a platform for a constructive exchange of opinions on the most pressing issues. In forming global structures today, democratic principles must reign, and an important place is reserved for the issues that are examined in the human dimension. In a number of countries in the OSCE region, including in Uzbekistan, every effort is being made to ensure that there is free democratic government on the principles of the self-determination of peoples. We believe that especially a characteristic of the democratization of countries is the expediency and consistency of these processes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. And now I call upon Kyrgyzstan, followed by Iceland.
Madam Chairperson, distinguished participants, the delegation of the Kyrgyz Republic would like to thank the government of Poland for their hospitality, and we would like to thank the Italian chairmanship and ODIHR for organizing today's event. The Kyrgyz Republic believes that the Polish meeting of the OSCE here today as a unique platform for dialogue of the representatives of participating states of the 57 OSCE members and civil society on the implementations on the principles and obligations of the OSCE under the human dimension. We hope that we will have constructive dialogue which is focused on the further strengthening of democracies and freedoms. Distinguished participants, in Kyrgyzstan today, we see a vast growth of the parliamentary form of government and bringing the national laws with international standards and in creating a legal system. In 2015, in Kyrgyzstan, we had presidential elections, and these were of a historical importance for the people of Kyrgyzstan because the transfer of power took place to the newly elected president of Kyrgyzstan, Bekov. International observers of the elections, including a mission from the OSCE ODIHR, gave high marks to these elections, and this bears witness to the efforts made by the government of the country. We believe that because civil society and all political forces in the country endorsed these elections, a very important role was played by our cooperation in the area of elections with ODIHR. And here we would like to thank ODIHR and the Electoral Commission during these elections. We're looking forward to our further cooperation with regard to the election processes in my country. In July of 2018, our President Bekov, when he spoke in Parliament, noted the aims and goals that will set out the future development of our country. One of these goals is building a state where all people's rights are respected and a society when citizens are sure that their rights will be protected. We believe that organization and legal mechanisms are important in the realization of cultural, social, and economic rights of our citizens, including by integrating human rights standards into our national laws and in our laws in general. The Kyrgyz Republic has consistently been implementing its obligations, and we are prepared to support the OSCE's initiatives in the future in order to bolster the mechanisms for human rights and fundamental freedoms. We are open to further cooperation with international organizations in the area of human rights. We wish everyone constructive and fruitful discussions at our meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I call upon the delegation from Iceland, followed by Mongolia.
Madam Chair, while aligning with the statement of the European Union, allow me to make some points on a national capacity. I also would like to thank our Polish hosts for their hospitality and ODIHR and the Italian chairmanship for organizing this meeting. Needless to say, ODIHR enjoys the full support of Iceland. On the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Iceland remains fully committed to the promotion and protection of human rights. Iceland's commitment is integrated into all areas of our foreign policy, as well as in bilateral and multilateral relations, including at the United Nations, the OSCE, and the Council of Europe. The protection of human rights is an essential part of the work of the OSCE. In that context, it is important to have in mind that there is a clear interaction between human rights, peace and security, and economic development. Allow me to mention that this summer Iceland took a seat in the United Nations Human Rights Council for the first time. In our commitments for the candidature, we stated that human rights are universal and concern everyone, everywhere. They are an integral part of international relations, and although their promotion and protection are the primary responsibility of states, they are not the private matter of each state. Allow me to mention three issues of importance for us in this context. Firstly, gender equality has for long been a priority issue for us in promoting gender equality and the empowerment of women. Iceland has focused on women's participation in decision-making, combating discrimination and violence against women, and respect for sexual and reproductive health and rights. We promote the Women and Peace and Security agenda, and we have a special focus on engaging men and boys and their crucial role in achieving gender equality. Secondly, we support initiatives aimed at eliminating all forms of violence against children, in particular sexual exploitation and abuse and harmful practices. It is necessary to secure the best interests of the child in justice systems and promote multi-agency and child-friendly approaches to child protective services. Thirdly, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights stipulates that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. This means everyone, irrespective of their gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Iceland has, along with other rights, also put the human rights of LGBTI individuals in the foreground of our membership of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations and in other multilateral cooperation. It is a key issue for our government, as the Icelandic Foreign Minister has stated. Finally, Iceland is devoted to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the commitment embedded in that agenda. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now I call upon Mongolia, followed by Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In view of time, I'll shorten my statement. The full version will be distributed later. The delegation of Mongolia expresses its sincere appreciation to the government of the Republic of Poland for its warm hospitality. We also thank the Italian chairmanship as well as the ODIHR for their tireless efforts to organize this meeting. This year's HDM is taking place in yet another time of testing challenges, both within our organization and in the OSCE region. It has been iterated many times in Vienna and here that the human dimension is an integral and fundamental part of the OSCE's work, yet concerns continue to remain and evolve despite our collective efforts. Respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, promoting democratic governance and the rule of law should play the key role in our efforts for maintaining peace and security in our region and globally. We commend the efforts exerted by the Italian chairmanship and Ambassador Azzoni for facilitating negotiations among the participating states concerning the HDM, including through the recent setup of an informal working group on the participation of the civil society, and look forward to the chairmanship's continued guidance in the remaining time ahead towards the Ministerial Council meeting in Milan. Since the HDM is a platform to foster forward-looking deliberations, we see a merit for this meeting to consider putting forward a recommendation to the Ministerial Council to hold discussions on further enhancing the OSCE human dimension activities. Madam Chair, strengthening the democratic and open society governed by the rule of law has been a long-standing priority for Mongolia. To achieve this very goal, Mongolia has undertaken systematic legal reforms in the last few years to enhance the protection and promotion of human rights, as well as to incorporate our international commitments into national policies and laws. Mongolia has also been actively cooperating with the human rights treaty bodies and other relevant international organizations. Their observations and recommendations are taken seriously. At the end of this month, after the HDM, Mongolia will be receiving an ODIHR mission as part of the latter's launch of a country-specific assessment exercise to identify challenges and good practices in the protection of human rights defenders in Mongolia. In view of the ongoing efforts at the national level to improve the situation of human rights defenders and introduce a new law on their protection, we truly expect that the visit of the ODIHR's mission will provide an assessment on the matter that contribute to further strengthening our government's efforts in the area of protection of human rights and human rights defenders in Mongolia. The government stands ready to work with the participating states, the partners for cooperation and the OSCE towards this end. Finally, Madam Chair, we believe the work of the core OSCE institutions is essential given their broad mandate and expertise, and we would like to see these institutions continue and enhance their efforts to assist the participating states in their reforms in meeting their OSCE commitments through constructive dialogue and cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mongolia. Before I give the floor to the last speaker here, which is Azerbaijan, I want to remind all the delegations that they have the right to reply, but I would ask those who want to use that, exercise that right to sign up for this list. But the floor, I give the floor now to Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In view of the references of the speakers to procedural matters related to HD meetings, the delegation of Azerbaijan would like to state the following. ODIHR is mandated by consensus OSCE decisions to follow strictly the organizational modalities of HD meetings, including the provisions on NGO participation as stipulated in Helsinki document of 92 and PC decision 476 of 2002 to ensure orderly conduct of HD meetings. A number of participating states called on ODIHR to prevent using HDM against the legitimate interests of participating states and to ensure the debate in HDM is constructive, is directed at review of implementation of OSCE commitments. We took note that ODIHR, in response to these calls, in cooperation with the Italian chairmanship, introduced the new registration system and prepared the code of conduct, which we hope will prevent abusing OSCE platform to propagate unlawful separatist entities. Yet not all immediate concerns of all participating states were addressed in their entirety. This resulted in failure to approve the agenda as so required by PC Decision 476 and the rules of procedure, which raised questions with regard to the status of today's meeting. The Republic of Azerbaijan is a strong proponent of following consensus-based decisions within the OSCE. Disregard of the consensus rule and the rules of procedure of the organization is detrimental to our shared concept of indivisible and cooperative security and will have negative consequences for the work of the OSCE. And lastly, with regard to references to Azerbaijan in the statements of EU delegation and Representative Adezir, I would like to state that we consider such statements as a reflection of a lack of proper understanding of domestic policy priorities of the government of Azerbaijan, as well as political processes taking place in our country. Double standards towards the development in our region cast doubt of credibility of such statements. I would like to underline that no one is prosecuted or detained in Azerbaijan due to his or her professional activities. All citizens, regardless of their profession, are equal before the law. The government of Azerbaijan will continue to enforce the rule of law. Instead of voicing usual ungrounded allegations, we encourage those instituted delegations to engage constructively with the delegation of Azerbaijan present at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I forgot one delegation that had asked for the floor, and that is Turkmenistan. And now I call upon the delegation of Turkmenistan to take the floor.
Thank you, distinguished chairperson, for having given me the floor. In recent years, in the country, steps are being implemented, including legal and economic, in the area of the human dimension. In this connection, legal acts in a number of areas have been adopted, and work is underway in adapting national legislation to international law. In our country, much work is underway to strengthen our democratic traditions and ensure the realization of the rights of our citizens. We have accumulated positive experience of cooperation with the OSCE and other international organizations in carrying out joint projects and programs. One priority of these programs is future strengthening of democratization and the rule of law and human development in order to achieve sustainable development. We have been preparing work on providing our national reports on human rights to the United Nations, and we note the implementation of these principles in our work. Our Universal Periodic Report is being prepared and will soon be the subject of a dialogue, as will our report on the Covenant on Political and Human Rights. We hold annual dialogue on human rights, which provides an excellent platform for an exchange of opinions in this area. Recently, on 21st June 2017, a meeting was held in the 10th round of human rights dialogue between the European Union and Turkmenistan. A number of issues were discussed at this meeting, specifically cooperation in multilateral fora of international organizations such as the UN, the OSCE, the ICRC, and the European Commission's Human Rights Division. In Turkmenistan, in September of 2016, we introduced the institution of Ombudsman on Human Rights, and in November of 2016, the Parliament, the Mejlis of Turkmenistan, adopted the law on the Ombudsman, which began their work in January of 2017. This person has been selected and is now functioning. It should be noted that the Ombudsman in their activities fulfills existing principles of human rights in our country, and we have created a national institution for human rights, which is an interministerial body in the area of human rights. In order to further improve the activities of government bodies, We have adopted a national plan of action in the area of human rights and gender equality, the rights of children, and it should be noted that these plans in their preparation, we have taken on board the recommendations of the United Nations. These plans will allow us to achieve results. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I will open up for the right to reply. And there are 4 delegations that are going to exercise the right. It's the Russian Federation, Ukraine, Austria on behalf of the EU, and Canada. And each delegation has 2 minutes to exercise the right to reply. First, it's the Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chairperson, distinguished participants. In line with ungrounded accusations against us of aggression, so-called in the southeast of Ukraine, and the so-called annexation of Crimea, we would like to point out some obvious things. The Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol have become full-fledged subjects of the Russian Federation as a result of the international recognized right for self-determination. This right was executed by the most democratic way there is, through the holding of a referendum. We also heard some criticism and lamentation with regard to the so-called human rights violations of the so-called Autonomous Republic of Crimea. This subject no longer exists since 2014. As regards the situation in the southeast of Ukraine, well, the competent international organizations, which include the ICRC, has described what is happening there as an internal armed conflict. We are convinced that the situation in the Donbass needs to be settled in line with a Minsk package of measures based on a direct dialogue between Kiev and the authorities of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. With regard to the statement, with regard to the so-called occupation inside Georgia, we would like to stress that we need to acknowledge the real situation of 2 independent states, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and to stop promoting unjustified accusations with regard to the people of these countries who have determined their own path forward. With regard to the criticism of Western colleagues with regard to the human rights situation in Russia, I would recall that today's agenda has included thematic meetings on the realization of individual rights and freedoms. We believe that that is the format where we should hold equal and respectful dialogue on the current problems. And we also have a great deal what we can say on the human rights situation on countries which are west of Vienna. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Ukraine to use the right to reply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Referring to the statement of the Russian Federation, I quote, on dialogue of Kiev with LPR and DPR, end of quote, we would like to emphasize that Ukrainian government doesn't have dialogue with terrorists and entities established by them. Kiev is ready for the dialogue with Moscow that controls those in Donetsk and Luhansk. Kiev is also ready for dialogue with Moscow on the occupation of Crimean Peninsula. It must be pointed out that there are no such regional entities in Russia within its internationally recognized borders as Republic of Crimea or City of Sevastopol. At the same time, there are 2 Ukrainian regions, the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the City of Sevastopol, which have been illegally occupied by Russia since 2014 in flagrant violation of international law and the OSCE principles and commitments. Speaking about the side event that was promoted by Russia, we have to point out that it is a sad example how Russian delegation is misusing HDIM by presenting so-called freedoms in occupation by using the propagandists who doesn't have the right to call themselves journalists. It's also worth noting that national minorities representatives are also involved in these games by the occupation authorities. We regret on such misuse and abuse of the OSCE principles and human dimension commitments. I thank you.
Thank you. And now I call upon Austria on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I pass on to the representative of the European Union.
Thank you very much. With reference to the statement and the right of reply of the distinguished representatives of the Russian Federation, first on the annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol, it is not so called, it is illegal. We reiterate our strong condemnation of it and we will not recognize it. We'd also like to reiterate our firm support for the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders, as well as its policy of non-recognition and engagement concerning the breakaway Georgian regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And finally, on a different point, I would like to reiterate our warm thanks and appreciation for the efforts of the Italian chairmanship in office in organizing this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I have two countries that are going to exercise the right to reply. It's Canada and then the US, and that then we are finished with the right to reply.
Thank you, Madam Director. Like others, I would like to respond with a right of reply to the Russian Federation, simply stating that Canada does not and will not recognize the Russian Federation's attempted illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol. And I would like to also reaffirm our full support for both Ukrainian and Georgian sovereignty within their internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I call upon the US delegation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just wanted to respond to our colleague from the Russian Federation to reiterate that we do not recognize Crimea as part of the Russian Federation. It is part of Ukraine. No matter how many times you say otherwise, it can't change that reality. Second, Ukraine, the conflict in Ukraine is not an internal issue. It's a hot war that's been fueled by the actions of the Russian Federation. And again, nothing, any other characterization cannot change that reality. Finally, we look forward to addressing some specific issues that were raised concerning our own country, including attacks on journalists, during the individual sessions that will be covering these topics. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That concludes statements of delegations, but and the right to reply. But as I told you in the beginning, when we started this session, Ambassador Paul Beckers, the director of the Office of the OSCE Secretary General, was supposed to deliver an opening statement, but because there was no flight this morning, he couldn't make it. But I think he wants to say a few words here to close this session.
Director, that's very, very kind of you. Thank you. And my apologies. Indeed, the flight was cancelled. I was lucky to have a fairly quick flight afterwards. Not everybody does. Like Ambassador of Lithuania, he sent his regards. He will come this afternoon. Thank you, Director. Mr. President, Representative, Freedom of the Media, Ambassador Azzoni, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I will limit my contribution to 3 points. The first of which I will start with a quote by High Commissioner Max van der Stoel, the former High Commissioner for National Minorities. He stated, "Seeking respect for human rights has to be considered indispensable for lasting stability." This quote underscores the importance of human rights to a comprehensive approach to security. Political, military aspects of security, environmental and economic aspects, and the human dimension, including respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law, are tightly intertwined. And OSCE participating states have vowed not to pursue them separately. Ultimately, human rights are the moral compass of any rule-based system. And this important meeting, once again, attests to this. And I would like to thank the Italian chairmanship for its leadership and our colleagues in ODIHR for organizing such a relevant event. A diverse range of voices, including from prominent civil society organizations, will be heard in the coming days. Their participation in our discussions is essential. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, multilateralism is under threat. The level of distrust in multilateral institutions by both governments and citizens is growing. But multilateralism is absolutely indispensable in today's world the complexity and transnational implications of the diverse security challenges that face us call for cooperative solutions. And respect for human rights and the rule of law should be integral to our approaches. But for multilateral organizations like the OSCE, we have to be humble and recognize there's ground for improvement in many areas. And that is why the OSCE is pursuing a reform agenda. That is my third and last point. The aim is to ensure that the organization has the capacity to address contemporary security challenges effectively. And several components relate to the human dimension. Think, for instance, about gender mainstreaming. Ensuring women and men have equal access to participation in political and civil life, just to mention one angle, is very much connected to OSCE third dimension efforts. Or involving young men and women in both security and human rights discussions. We need to provide them with platforms to convey their messages, and we need to listen carefully to what they say. In these and other areas, the reform agenda intends to strengthen our work and make our organization fit for purpose in this demanding yet resource-limited environment. Ambassadors, Director, I would like to wish you all productive discussions in the days ahead. As Secretary General Gemminger often says, we must ensure that protecting the dignity of the individual always remains an integral part of our action. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And this concludes this opening session. Allow me to thank all the speakers, thanks to the audience and to the interpreters that have been interpreting every word that has been said here. The HD meeting is now open, and I look forward to the first session that will take place after a lunch break. But before I conclude this session, I would like to give Katarzyna Garpakacze, the first Deputy Director of ODIHR, the word. She will give you some technical information. Katarzyna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Director. It is a pleasure to deliver technical information, not least because it contains some fun points. I would like to throw to your attention the meeting manual produced every year, where you will find all relevant information about this meeting and also the timetable that you should have received. I will just highlight a couple of points. Before each working session, the list of speakers will be opened 60 minutes earlier, either inside or outside of the plenary session. And because the list of speakers, for the sake of time, is limited to 50 entries, please make sure to sign up early and on time. Once the limit is reached, we will open a reserve list. However, the reserve list can only be used in case there is no shows from the main list. And in case the list of speakers contains many signed up participants, the list speaking time will be limited to the time set by the moderator, and the moderator will be strict with keeping the time. Given this time limit, we strongly encourage you to first present your recommendations and then elaborate on reasons for these recommendations. You can also submit your recommendations to the HDIM documentation desk, and then they will be uploaded through the documents distribution system of this meeting. To facilitate good interpretation, if you have prepared notes or statements, kindly submit them also to the documents desk before the session, so they can be given to the interpreters. They will not be distributed further unless you specifically ask for it. ODIHR will continue to compile all recommendations emerging from this meeting, so please submit your recommendations to the Document Center as a separate document if possible, preferably in electronic form. We will compile all recommendations and distribute them after the HDIM in the consolidated summary of this meeting. The consolidated summary will also contain
reports compiled by the rapporteurs of each working session. These reports will be available online. The ones from the first week will be available in the second week of HDIM, and the ones from the second week, except for the last 18th session, will be circulated before the closing plenary. HDIM is live streamed on ODIHR's Facebook and the 2018 HDIM event page. Updates from HDIM are also available on the ODIHR's website and on Twitter, and you have all information about hashtags and access addresses on this little paper in your welcome pack. Delegates and other participants can use dedicated rooms located on the first floor, each with a number of computers and other office equipment. The Sofitel restaurant and cafe are available to HDIM participants during the whole meeting, and all HDIM participants can enjoy a 10% discount for the entire menu in the bar and in the restaurant, except for alcoholic drinks. There will also be a special price for business lunch, and all this will be available when you show the meeting badge, mention the OSCE meeting, and request the discount before ordering. We kindly ask you to familiarize yourself after this plenary session with emergency exit procedures to be followed in case of fire or other accidents. Please note the exits that are in that direction of the room. In case of an evacuation, the gathering point for all HDIM participants will be opposite the hotel entrance in the Ogród Saski or Saxon Gardens Park behind the tomb of the unknown soldier. For security emergency cases, please approach the designated ODIHR security officer, whose information you can find in the meeting manual. During the whole HDIM, the ODIHR staff will be available to answer your questions, and that also is an opportunity for me to introduce to you and thank our new Human Dimension Meetings officer, Mr. Martin Toplicek, who is behind me right there, and you can address him for any issues or concerns related to the meeting. I am also pleased to announce tonight at 18:30 the reception hosted by our Polish host and the Italian OSCE chairmanship in Villa Foxal, and the invitation along with the map is in front of you. And also, I have a pleasure to invite you to the reception that my office, our office, will be hosting next week on Tuesday, on the 18th of September, at Bristol Hotel at 8 o'clock in the evening. Invitations will be distributed closer to the event. To enter the receptions, any of these receptions, you must bring your badge and your ID with you. They will be checked at the entry. And finally, I am pleased to announce that similarly to last year, the Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews offers free entrances for the participants of the meeting. All you need to do is to go and present your HDIM badge at the ticket office. And I wish you and us all a very interesting and productive discussion here over the next 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katarzyna. This concludes the opening session, and now we will have a lunch break. Thanks to all of you for your participation.